Let's give it up for our next comic. First time on the stage. Give it up for Marta.
I don't know how to follow that. I will not do any interviews, I promise you. So for me, this is sort of a good combo of my work as a comedian and my day job, as I like to say, comedian by night, communication consultant by day. Don't ask what other C words apply. Who's on the phone? But normally when I do PowerPoints at work, somebody else creates them. So don't share this with any graphic designers I work with because they will be appalled. I'm here to talk to you about Emeline Bachelder, who, Eliza, you might be interested. She is from the New England area. We are going to answer the question about Emeline. Did she put the mother in motherfucker? I'm guessing nobody here has heard of her, yes? But if this were the 1980s, you might have. In the 1980s, there was a novel, an opera, and a documentary on PBS about her. In today's terms, she's sort of like Slender Man. Like you've heard of her, you know there's some sort of folklore, folk story, you don't exactly know what it is, right? Everything we know about Emeline comes from a woman named Nettie Mitchell. Nettie was a little girl when Emeline was an old woman, and she claimed that she grew up hearing all these stories about Emeline from her grandmother and her aunts and the townspeople, and that Emeline was a cautionary tale in her town, that people would say, don't grow up to be like Emeline. Nettie, in 1975, she recorded a series of interviews telling the story of Emeline. And she also talked to the author Judith Rossner. And I'm going to digress to tell you about Judith Rossner. Has anybody heard of her? No. Okay, again, though, in the 1980s, you would have. In the 1980s, Judith Rossner, or in 1975, she wrote Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which is a novel based on a true story of a sweet, innocent first grade teacher by day who goes out cruising bars for rough trade at night and winds up being murdered. It was made into a movie with Diane Keaton. It was very popular. The basic idea was sex is good, but if you do too much, you'll die. And that was the basic motif of all of the 1980s for most of us. Judith Rossner also wrote the book Emeline, based on Nettie's story. So what is the story that Nettie told? I'll tell you, Judith Rossner, like, you don't know her today, but she would be like Dancing with the Stars level famous. Like, you think you know who she was, maybe you remember her, and then that one person you know is like, oh, I'm so excited, Judith Rossner's on Dancing with the Stars. Anyway, so thank you. This is the story that Nettie told Judith Rossner. Emeline was from a very poor family in Maine, and when she was about 13 years old, somebody suggested to her family that they could send her to a mill in Lynn, Massachusetts, to work in the factories. And this was actually a fairly common practice at the time. You would get one child out of the house, one less mouth to feed. Also, they could send money home. This was before child labor laws, so the good old days that the Trump administration would like us to go back to. So she goes off to work in the mills, and when she is about 14, she is, as Nettie puts it, seduced by the mill owner. Today, of course, we would call that child rape, which is also something the Trump administration would like us to go back to. So she is raped, she becomes pregnant, and she meets a childless family in town who says, hey, give us your baby, we'll give you money to go home, you can pretend it never happened. And she doesn't have a lot of good options, right? So she decides to do this. She goes home and lives a fairly normal life. The only thing is she's very quiet. She's a very beautiful girl, and yet she never wants to date. She never wants to go to the dances. She wants nothing to do with most people. Until sometime later, there's some work being done on a road in town, And she meets walking down the road one day, she meets one of the young men working on the road. And they fall in love, despite the fact that he is 14 years younger than she is. And they get married. Do we see where this is going? His parents come to town and are appalled to discover that he has married the girl that gave them their baby. Y'all really didn't see that coming?
I hate when that happens.
All right, so his name is Leonard. They tell Leonard the truth. He is, first of all, strangely devastated that she was not a virgin, despite the fact that she was 14 years older than he was. Also, though, that, of course, he has married and slept with his mother. He gets the marriage annulled, goes home. The town shuns poor Emeline because she had a child out of wedlock and because she married him. She dies in abject poverty. So that is the story that Nettie told. And then, after the novel comes out, some people from PBS, it's a theme tonight, decide to come and make a documentary, a 1-hour documentary. And they do a little research, and they find some things that are a little different. And this is basically, for them, the story starts off the same, except they decide that she was not sent to Lynn, Massachusetts. She was sent to Lowell, Massachusetts. They never explain why they decide that. There's no evidence of that. They just say that. And the entire documentary is like this. If you like really strong New England accents, a lot of victim blaming, and just cognitive dissonance everywhere. Like they just, every time something doesn't make sense, they're like, oh, well, I guess that doesn't make sense. If that's the kind of documentary you like, Sins of Our Mothers is for you. So what they go about the story in pretty much the same way. And then they find out something. They find out that in her 20s, Emeline actually did marry. She married a man named George. And they had a son. And then George kind of disappears. And it's not clear if he dies or he just runs off, but he is considered dead. And then in her 60s, Emeline marries a man named Leonard, who is 14 years younger than she is. And then his people come to town and say, wait a minute, we recognize this. Same thing happens. The town shuns her because she had a child out of wedlock and then married him. She dies alone in poverty. So it's a heartbreaking story, right? 1 hour on PBS. Later, in about 2012, 2014, this is online now, Sins of Our Mothers, and some people start to watch it. And they start to think, wait a minute. And they start to do actual research. Now, why the filmmakers didn't do research, we don't know. I think maybe, so to be fair, historical research was harder in the 80s. Like, if anybody here was in grad school at the time, you had to look things up on microfiche and things weren't digitized. It was harder to do research, but it was possible. But in the 2000s, two separate people start looking into this, and they find out all sorts of things. Emeline was born. There is no evidence that she moved to Lynn or Lowell. There's no evidence that she didn't, but there's no evidence that she did. Her brother, however, did live in Lowell and run like a boarding house for girls who worked in mills, so it feels like there would be evidence. She was married to George, and again, we don't really know what happened to him. But here's the thing, George is her first cousin, which is fairly normal at the time. They do have a son. Also, George's sister, so also Emeline's cousin, is married to a man who is 12 years younger than she is. In 1878, in her 60s, Emeline again marries Leonard, or not again, but again in this telling, who actually, though, according to records, is 16 years older than Emeline. So probably not her son. And she dies at the age of 81. She dies of dysentery, not starvation. She is broke, but so is everybody in this town. So this raises some questions, like why didn't they do research? What was the point? But mainly the question it raises is, what the fuck, Nettie? mean, really? What was the deal? Did Nettie not like Emeline? Did her grandmother and her aunts not like her? What? We don't know. My theory, based on nothing, but again, apparently in this world you don't need a theory to base it on anything, is that some parts of the story, somebody in town didn't like Emeline. And they're like, oh, well, you know about her. And then maybe Nettie got it all confused with the sister who was married to somebody 12 years younger. And a story kind of built that she came to believe. And if you all think about the weirdest rumor from your high school, you understand this theory, right? Like, this is what we do. The other thing I think that happened is about these motherfuckers. Most of you all look like you went to high school, or at least middle school, so you probably know about Oedipus. But I'll give you a brief rundown on Oedipus. King Laius, Queen Jocasta, an oracle comes to town and says, hey, when your son grows up, he's going to kill his father, marry his mother. They say, we don't want that, and they leave him out on a mountain to die, which is not that uncommon in ancient Greece. Basically, y'all, we're living in good times. So they leave him out to die. A young childless couple comes along. They find him. They're like, hey, we need a child. They take him. They name him Oedipus because his feet have been bound together because they thought he would run away as a baby. I don't know. And his foot is swollen, and Oedipus literally means swollen foot. The detail about the feet being bound together is just a weird, unexplained detail, like so many things in this story. So Oedipus as a baby, goes home with this new couple. No one ever tells him he's adopted. He grows up, and an oracle comes to town and says, you're going to murder your father and marry your mother. And he says, I don't want that. And he leaves town. And as he's on the road, he runs into somebody, and an altercation ensues, and he kills a guy. And sometime later, he winds up in Thebes, and they're like, hey, we're having this contest. If you can solve the riddle of the Sphinx, you get to marry our recently widowed Queen Jocasta. And so he does that, and they have 3 children. And then some years later, there's a lot of chaos. There's famine, there's war, and another freaking oracle comes to town and is like, well, if you want all this to stop, you should probably find out who in this town killed their father and married their mother. And Jocasta and Oedipus look at each other, having both heard this story, and think, Jocasta kills herself, Oedipus blinds himself, and that is the story of Oedipus, which we all know because of Freud, right? And I did include this picture of Freud on the left where he is young because he's surprisingly handsome. Did you all know that? He was cute. But Freud lived from 1856 to 1939, so some overlap with both Emeline and Nettie. And in 1899, he published the Oedipus complex. And the Oedipus complex, for the ancient Greeks, the story of Oedipus, the point was quit fighting fate. If you have a fate, that's going to happen. Quit trying to outrun it. For Freud, the point was, we all go through some developmental stage where you want to kill your same-sex parent in order to sleep with your opposite-sex parent. Now, Freud based this theory. He had a series of interviews with women in Vienna who had psychological issues. And some of these women said, hey, I was molested by my father or my uncle or my grandfather. And Freud said to the people of Vienna, hey, we seem to have an issue in this town. And they said, that can't be right. And he said, oh, no, you're right. These women must be hysterical. They must be fantasizing about this. Therefore, this must be a normal developmental phase that some people don't grow out of. So for over 125 years, we have been using this to convince young men that they need to separate from their mothers. And I don't just complain about that because my son goes to school in Oklahoma. Who told him to do that? Freud. Anyway, what does all this mean? I don't know. We have all these different stories, right? We have stories that one person said and maybe another person heard, and a theory that's based on nothing. I don't know. The most I can think is maybe don't gossip. Don't kill your father and or marry your mother and or son. And if you make up stories, don't make up stories about people because 100 years from now, it's going to be a big headache for historians. If you want any of the links so that you can also watch the amazingly strong New England accents or read those articles about it, you can DM me on Instagram and I will send them to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Keep it going for Marta. Good stuff, Marta. Come on the show anytime.